Good evening, everyone. Welcome to White Collar Support Group's Tuesday night speaker series. Tonight, we are grateful and honored to have Amy Nelson as our guest speaker tonight. I'll tell you more about her in a minute. First, a little bit of housekeeping. This is brought to you by our White Collar Support Group. And as most of you probably know, we meet on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. We've been doing it for 8.5 years, and we have 440 meetings under our belt. So we've grown and learned and been helped by and helped a lot of people along the way. We have a lot of other things we do as a support group, including a Slack group and events. And we hope you will join us, or if you know someone who's just as impacted and wants to join us, you can find more information on our website at prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist.org. And you get more information there, including how to contact us. And we are open to anybody who has a justice-related problem. Just a little more housekeeping. Our year-end fundraising drive has started. So if you could check us out on the website, and if you feel so inclined, please remember us this holiday season. We have a lot of programs and services and advocacy efforts that are going to be going on for 2025, and we can't do it without the support of our donors and our friends. So please go there, as well as we are already starting to plan for our 2025 conference, since our 2024 conference worked out so well. And so watch our website for more information about that. And the last thing I want to say is one of our fellow travelers, Carlos Watson, who has his case in the Eastern District of New York. The documentary about him dropped yesterday, I believe. And so you can find it on YouTube. Just Google or search Carlos Watson documentary, and you'll find it. Fascinating story of judicial impropriety and prosecutorial misconduct, which is a nice segue for our conversation tonight. By the way, I want to let everyone know that I am against prosecutorial misconduct, and no doubt. But it's a nice segue for our conversation tonight. This is Amy Nelson, and I'm going to give you a little background about Amy. She's the founder of the Riveter, which is the first way I found out about her a bunch of years ago, a venture-backed company that was launched in Seattle in 2017, and that was launched as a co-working and community startup. And she had to pivot during the pandemic to build a career in media platform. The reason why Amy is so well known now is that she and her husband have been through a horrifying legal system journey over the last 4 years, I would say. That's about right. Amy will give us more information about that. And so part of it is civil, part of it is criminal, and she's going to talk about it and her heroic efforts to save her family, which makes her kind of a one-woman force of nature, a one-person force of nature. I apologize. I didn't mean anything by that. Anyway, so Amy, we're going to give you the floor for as long as you want, half hour, 45 minutes, whatever you want. And then afterwards, we'll do Q&A and anybody who'd like to share. So take it away, Amy, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm so happy to be here. This is a club I didn't know a lot about 4 years ago, but I've met some of the best people in the world going through the justice system, even though I did not want to go through the system like this. But I'm really, really grateful to be here. So thank you. And before I start, for all of you, I have so much empathy for everybody here. So it's a really hard place to be. So Jeff talked a little bit about my startup, the Riveter, but if you set the scene in 2020, I'm running my startup, the Riveter. I am a recovering lawyer. I had been a litigator for a decade. So maybe this whole thing is like karma punching me in the face, but I'd been a litigator. I'd worked for a big law firm in New York and then moved to Seattle in 2012 with my husband. He joined a little company called Amazon.com. And we had built a life in Seattle. I started the Riveter. We had 4 little girls who, right before the pandemic, were 5, 3, 2, and 6 months old. Um, and my husband had spent 8 years at Amazon and their subsidiary, Amazon Web Services, where he worked on real estate development. And then he had left in 2019 and started his own company doing real estate development for data centers, which is, obviously a booming place to be. And he had built, I think, more data centers than anyone in the world. So he was able to build a really successful company very quickly. And, I thought life was frenetic and chaotic, but good. And when the pandemic hit, it obviously, because I had co-working spaces in an event business, it just, kind of hammered my family immediately. But I didn't realize what would happen 2 weeks later would make all of that just kind of disappear into the background. Our story started on April 2nd, 2020 at around 6:45 a.m. when there was a knock at our front door at our house in Seattle. And we had a glass door and I had a baby on my hip. And I went to the door and it was 2 kind of like official looking people. And I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe like there'd been some health issue overnight with the pandemic and people were going door to door. So I kind of looked through the glass door and shrugged, and then they flashed their FBI badges. And then when people say you had no idea, we had no idea what was happening, just absolutely none. And as I tell you the story, and I explain what my husband was accused of, I think it's really important for everyone to know that like I knew everything my husband had done, and I'm an attorney and I thought it was okay. And so that has also been a hard part of the story. But, I opened the door and the FBI agents asked to speak to my husband. And so I yelled for my husband and he came down in his pajamas, and the agents said they wanted to speak to him. And I looked at my husband square in the eye and I said, "You cannot speak to these agents without a lawyer, because even if you think you've done nothing wrong, you should never talk to these people. They're not there for a fun conversation at 6:45 a.m. So they kind of gave my husband a letter, 2 letters. And one letter told him that he was the target of a federal criminal investigation in the Eastern District of Virginia. And the other letter said that they intended to seize his assets. Sounds so privileged. I had never heard of civil forfeiture. I also did not know anything about federal criminal investigations. I had been a civil litigator, so I didn't, at the moment in time, I didn't know there was like target, subject, witness, which everyone here knows. But I did know that if the FBI agents had come and if they had given him those letters and if they had taken those steps, that like something was on a path, right? Something was happening, because my husband said, I have no idea what is going on. Like there must be some misunderstanding. I'm sure we can clear it up. And I was like, I don't think it's going to be that easy to clear this up, whatever it is. So immediately kind of got on the phone and found, I immediately like remembered that at my old law firm in New York, Cahill Gordon, there had been a former Southern District of New York U.S. attorney who had joined before I had left. So I find out where he is. He was at a different firm, and we call him, and he kind of walks me through like, what does the letter say? And he's like, this is a big deal. But then we ended up, my husband hired a lawyer, and my husband, the first thing he said, and they said in the letter that it was related to Amazon, but they didn't say how it was related to Amazon, this wire fraud investigation. So my husband asked the lawyer to call Amazon and say, like, ask them what's going on. So my husband's lawyer calls Amazon, and they don't speak to him, but refer him to the law firm Gibson Dunn. And the first call to Gibson Dunn was like, Amazon will not speak to Mr. Nelson unless he plans to plead guilty to these allegations. And I think my husband's lawyer said to Gibson Dunn, can you explain the allegations to me? Because we don't really even know what he's being accused of. And it took a couple of weeks for us to figure it out. But essentially, my husband was accused of steering real estate deals to a developer in exchange for kickbacks. And my husband had not done that. And so we were kind of like, what are the next steps that happen here? We very quickly learned that the federal prosecutors had decided that my husband had committed a crime and that there wasn't really a conversation to be had. And they had accused an entire group of people of a crime. What my husband had done is that while he still worked at Amazon, he had set up a company through a lawyer, taken investment, and then he started operating the company after he left. One of his investors had made money from a real estate developer. He'd made a commercial real estate referral fee, which is common and legal, and he had referred the developer to Amazon. Lawyers involved on all sides with those arrangements. And that guy who'd made the referral fee had invested in my husband's company. My husband had not met the guy the months after he'd made the referral fee, nor did my husband have any ability to approve a deal at Amazon. He wasn't one of like 7 approvers. And furthermore, my husband's Amazon employment contract explicitly allowed him to start a company while he worked at Amazon. His only limitation was he couldn't get investment from somebody who was also an investor in Amazon. So all sorts of, things like that. But the Amazon had, accused a whole group of people, and we didn't really know the details of who they'd accused or what they'd said. But very quickly we learned that, again, like there wasn't going to be a conversation. And then when my husband refused to plead guilty to Amazon's allegations, then things just became really horrifying very quickly for us. In May, and this is May of 2020, so it's the pandemic, the FBI had shown up on April 2nd. In the middle of May, my husband's lawyers did get to give a presentation to the DOJ, which in hindsight, I wish they hadn't. But I think at the time the lawyers thought there could be a conversation. The prosecutors promptly left that meeting and got affidavits or warrants to seize all of our bank accounts. And they seized my husband's bank accounts. They seized his business accounts. They seized my personal accounts because my husband had sent like one wire to me once. And they seized my father's bank accounts because we helped my father financially. He had just gotten a kidney transplant and had been on the verge of death. And that was, how we found out that happened is I was on a Zoom at 4:00 in my house one day in May. And I got an alert on my phone that my Wells Fargo account was overdrawn. And I was confused because I'd had money in that account. And I opened the account and it said, like check drafted by FBI order. They had taken all of our money. So there we are in May of 2020 with 4 little girls and no money. They also seized the money my husband had paid his law firm. They went into the law firm's client trust account and seized all of the money my husband had paid the lawyers, which the partners that were working with my husband had never heard of the DOJ doing. But it became very clear they just wanted us on our knees and not able to fight. And then 10 days after that happened, and 2 days after my daughter's first birthday, at 6:45 a.m. again, there was a banging on the door. And it was 4 FBI agents in their FBI jackets. And we thought they were there to arrest Carl. And I yelled for him because we thought if that was going to happen, we just wanted him to get out of the house as quickly as possible. So our oldest daughter wouldn't see it. She would have been the only one that would remember it. So he runs out and he runs out with his hands out like this. And the FBI is like, we're not here to arrest you. We're doing a search warrant. And then we were even more confused because they told my husband he'd been a target months before and his lawyers had just given a presentation. And so they walked into our home and they took stacks of attorney-client privileged documents with law firm letterhead on it. And then they took my husband's laptop, which he opened for them and gave them the password. And they wrote the password down on their sheet, and his phone. And my husband said there's lots of attorney-client privilege stuff on this laptop as well. And it's important to note too that, my husband had told the DOJ, he had his criminal attorneys, but he told the DOJ, like everything I did, setting up my company, et cetera, I did with a lawyer, which he did, a business lawyer. And so, that stuff, but my husband had not waived his privilege at that point. And we later got a copy of the search warrant years later because the DOJ forgot to renew a seal on it in the Western District of Washington. And they, in their search warrant for our home, requested documents between my husband and his business attorney, but did not tell the judge that the business attorney was even an attorney or my husband's attorney, which kind of blew my mind as a lawyer that they would do that. So now we have no money. They've done the search warrant. And you're kind of like, at this point, what do you do? And my husband's lawyers had one conversation with him and said, do you want to plead? And, my husband asked what that would look like. Because obviously, I'm sure there are people here who feel they did not commit the crimes that they were charged with and maybe didn't. and maybe pled anyway. But for my husband, he wasn't the main target of this whole criminal investigation. The real estate developer was the person they said paid kickbacks. And any plea for my husband involved pointing the finger at the real estate developer and other people. And that was not a possibility for my husband, just the way he is. And so we said no. And that was that. And then I looked at my husband and I said, like, if we're going to fight, we're going to fight with everything that we have. Because if, and I don't know how many years this is going to take or if we'll be able to survive it, but at least we can say we tried. I did not know what we would have to do. But after the DOJ had seized the money and done the search warrant, then Amazon, knowing my husband had no money, then Amazon sued him for racketeering in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia. And at the time when my husband was sued, I thought it was the most devastating thing on earth because I was like, how in the hell are we going to fight this? But the civil lawsuit turned out to be the greatest gift for my husband because we ultimately were able to get discovery in the civil lawsuit. And civil discovery is, it gives us a lot more power and information than we would have ever gotten in a criminal case. Including, eventually, we were able to obtain all of the communications between Amazon's lawyers and the Department of Justice. And it was in that process, which we finally got those communications in February of 2022. And this all started in 2020. And it was in that process that we learned what had happened and just how horrifying it all was. But before we got the discovery, we got a phone call from the federal prosecutors who were running the investigation. And we didn't really know why they were calling. At the time, we were still trying to get our money back that they had seized in 2020. It is now the end of January 2022. And the government, when they seize your money and don't charge you with a crime, they have to file a lawsuit against your money. So the government had filed a lawsuit against our money, but then successfully obtained stays of the lawsuit. So they filed the lawsuit, but then no judge made them prove anything. So we're almost 2 years into this and had no ability to even fight to get our money back. But in February of 2022, the stay was going to expire, and the judge seemed to indicate that he was going to tell the prosecutors, like, you got to prove this or give them their money back. So at the end of January 2022, we're about to have to litigate the civil forfeiture, and Amazon was about to have to give us all of their communications with the DOJ. So the two federal prosecutors that at the time were running the investigation, and I'm not sure how long all of your investigations lasted, but we had 9 prosecutors work on this 4-year investigation that my husband was part of. The federal prosecutors call my husband, or set up a call with my husband and his attorneys, Amazon and their attorneys, which is wild, and all of the other targets and their attorneys. The prosecutors get on the phone and they said, we want to make sure no one's recording this. I recorded it, which is legal to do because we are in a one-party consent state. And they didn't ask everyone by name to say they weren't recording, but I recorded it, and I'm very glad I did, because the other prosecutor on the call then proceeded to go into a 30-minute soliloquy explaining to Amazon's targets that if they did not agree to an immediate stay of Amazon's civil litigation that had been going on for 2 years at that point, or a year and a half, they would get what they deserved. The DOJ would find a way to charge them with obstruction or perjury, even if they didn't charge with any underlying crime, that they were fighting a two-front war they could not win against Amazon and the DOJ. And so, I mean, they said all of these things, and Amazon's listening to them say this, right? So they know where the DOJ is and all of this. And that they, if the targets would all agree to a stay, the DOJ could do their job and figure out if these guys did anything wrong. They also said in the call that one of the reasons the targets should agree to a stay is that because they were going to be deposed in the civil litigation and they were in a trip box because they would either have to perjure themselves or plead the fifth. The DOJ had decided there was not an option that these men could tell the truth and prove their innocence. All the men on the call would not agree to a stay because they wanted to be deposed and they wanted to go through with the civil litigation. As a result of that, we did get the money back from the DOJ. The DOJ did not want to litigate with us. They returned the money after 22 months. We got back 85% of the money as long as we agreed not to sue the DOJ. That was our settlement agreement. And then my husband didn't litigate because it never went to trial, but filed a motion for summary judgment in the civil case, and he won. But going back to the communications that we found between Amazon and the DOJ, what we learned and pieced together ultimately was that on February 19th, 2020, Amazon had broken a contract with the real estate developer who was their main target. And per the plain terms of the contract, the only way that they could do it without, giving the developer time to cure the alleged contract breach, or end up paying hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, is if the developer pled guilty or was convicted of a felony. Their first meeting with the DOJ was the next day at 10 a.m. And we also learned that Amazon had specifically hired a former federal prosecutor from the Eastern District of Virginia to lobby his former colleagues. And also Amazon's business partner, an entity called IPI, was also involved in this. They also hired a former federal prosecutor from EDVA, who was lobbying actually his former subordinate. He had been the financial fraud chief. And we also learned that, a lot of shocking things, like the now U.S. attorney for EDVA wrote to Amazon's lawyer after the first meeting. She said, thank you so much for your presentation. It's a testament to you and your clients' hard work. Please don't worry. We have hand selected our two very best prosecutors for Amazon's important matter. And that email to me just rocked what I thought about the Department of Justice in this country. I was a lawyer. I was also deeply involved in politics my whole life. I was a bundler for Obama. I was on his National Finance Committee. I did get out the vote, legal boiler rooms, the whole thing. And I thought if there was a party that believed in doing things the right way and treating people equally, it was the Democratic Party. And to see a democratically appointed U.S. attorney do this, it made me realize it's really the system. And it doesn't have to do, I think, with either party. It's the system and the system is just so powerful and broken and believes it doesn't have to play by the rules that it just goes after you and it makes a decision and it goes after you. It's like a train that can't stop. We also learned that Amazon asked for civil forfeiture, that Amazon sent over my husband's former employee bank account information to Amazon in an email without a subpoena to help DOJ seize our bank accounts. And it goes on and on. And it was all just pretty wild to find out. But that happens and on we go. You think you learn something like that and then someone will come to their senses and stop, but they didn't, right? Neither Amazon or the DOJ. So as I said, my husband a year later filed for a motion for summary judgment in the civil case. He still has never been indicted, right? We still don't know what's going on. We've gotten our money back from civil forfeiture, but we don't speak to the DOJ anymore. Right before my husband won summary judgment in the civil case, prosecutors docketed 4 pleas from alleged co-conspirators of my husband. So this is in February of 2023. And I remember at that moment thinking, oh my God, they're going to indict my husband after all of this because they'd had these pleas, I think, from the very beginning of their investigation. They were all from non-Amazon employees. And I remember thinking they are going to charge my husband when the activity that he's being accused of doing is authorized by his employment contract. Which, if you're wondering why the DOJ didn't feel the same way as us, Amazon did not give the DOJ my husband's employment contract for 6 months. When they seized our money, when they raided our home, when they got the pleas, they didn't have my husband's employment contract. And after they finally got the employment contract, the only thing prosecutors ever said to us in 4 years is, we don't think this employment contract authorized the activity that happened here. That's all they say. So they docket the pleas, but they haven't been entered yet. Then the first week of March, 2 of the pleas were entered. And these 2 men had pled guilty to helping my husband commit a crime called private sector honest services fraud, which is a type of wire fraud. If you haven't heard of it, it's violating your fiduciary duty to a company by taking bribes or kickbacks. And the 2 men who pled guilty, we were able to actually depose them in the civil case. And they said they had no idea what my husband's Amazon employment contract said he could do or not. And a host of other things that were in the statement of facts. They had no idea. They couldn't answer to them in the civil case. So again, that was very interesting in the interplay between the civil and the criminal. And then right after those pleas were entered, then the judge in the civil case said he excoriated Amazon in this 40-page summary judgment order, saying there was no fraud, no racketeering, no unjust enrichment, and that in fact Amazon's employment contract had in fact authorized my husband to do exactly what Amazon had said he couldn't. He left in 2 state law claims Those have never been litigated yet because Amazon is appealing the loss of the other claims up to the Fourth Circuit. But I do know, and this has not been reported publicly, and I've never seen it, but I know that after the summary judgment order came out, the judge emailed the prosecutors and the attorneys for the two defendants who hadn't entered their pleas yet and basically said, now that you've seen my summary judgment order, how are you changing your statement of facts to reflect our findings? And then the prosecutors dismissed those two plea agreements very quickly. It took them 7 more months to vacate the pleas of the other two men who had pled guilty and had their pleas entered. And in January, they did not tell us they were doing it. You know, we were under the impression, this is January of 2024, we were under the impression that they were moving forward with the criminal case and would charge my husband despite the judge's order in the civil case. And then one evening in early January 2024, we got a phone call from the main target's lawyer, and he said, the prosecutors just vacated the pleas and told us the investigation was over. So after nearly 4 years and us spending $3.7 million on lawyers to fight the criminal investigation, the civil forfeiture, and Amazon's civil case, the criminal investigation ended. And the thing I'll never get over is that when it ended, I think the prosecutors, like the prosecutor who called the main target's lawyer, you know, he felt like a good guy. He was like, we did the right thing by vacating this plea, right? But to me, I'm like, you didn't do the right thing because you know that you were lied to, and they've done nothing and won't. And to make it even wilder, a month after the pleas were vacated, one of the men who'd pled guilty called me. He found me on TikTok, and I'll get to TikTok in 1 second. But he called me and he said to me, I'd never spoken to him. And he said to me, I was threatened with everything in my life. I was told what to say, and your husband did nothing wrong. I recorded that phone call. I'm not recording this, I promise, even though Jeff is. But I recorded that phone call and we gave it to prosecutors. We gave it to Amazon, and no one cares. There's no investigation of Amazon's lawyers. I have since spoken to the number 3 on the criminal side of the DOJ, and his suggestion to me was to report it to OIG. But there's been no consequence for Amazon for doing what they did, which means they'll do it again. And we talk a lot in this country right now about lawfare, but I think corporations going to the DOJ is something that's very real. It's probably impacted a lot of people here. And you are asking the Department of Justice to interpret corporate policies and contracts, which I think is incredibly dangerous than regular folks do. There was a point in the middle of all this that I decided that we were going to speak out publicly. A lot of people wouldn't have done that, but there are a few reasons that I decided I was going to, and my husband was kind of like, okay. But my husband's attorney has been my friend for 20 years, and he's knows that I had spoken a lot on social media as the founder of the Riveter. And also we all agreed the truth was the truth in this case. And so we weren't worried about saying something wrong. And so I decided that I would start telling the story, and I kind of tried writing it a little bit on Twitter and telling a little bit on Instagram where I had followings. But people kept telling me to try TikTok, and I was like, oh, that sounds just exhausting. I can't do it. But I started one day, just put the phone in front of my face and started talking into TikTok. And I now have about 240,000 followers that kind of tune in and listen to really a lot of like deep legal arguments or discussions about what happened to my family, which is a platform I'm now hoping to use to tell other people's stories. But what it taught me is that there's a lot of people who understand that the system is one that doesn't really operate by the rules, and they want it to. And it's interesting too, because of my 240,000 followers, I would say it's probably half Republican and half Democrat. And while there's a lot of fighting lately during the election, I think it's really interesting and powerful that people from all sides can come together and say this is wrong. And it also, I know the prosecutors watched it. I know prosecutors from around the country watch it. Many prosecutors have reached out to me. Many former FBI agents have reached out to me. And I think it's important to give visibility to something that I believe is really wrong. Amazon at one point sent me a letter threatening to accuse me of a federal crime of witness tampering if I didn't shut down my TikTok and stop calling out the lawyers by name. But I will say, if you speak about prosecutorial misconduct like Carlos is dealing with, I think it's really important to name people to name prosecutors, to name attorneys, because I think it's kind of one of the biggest cons in America that like a company will do something to you because a company is a logo. People at a company are making those decisions. So that's why we did it. But yeah, that's kind of, and I do think it really, really mattered deeply. I think speaking out publicly mattered and was part of the reason the DOJ decided not to move forward. Because I know that they move forward with a lot of prosecutions that maybe they aren't 100% certain about, but understand they can win, which is a real problem in America. But thanks for letting me tell the story. I've talked for a while now.
Amy, thank you so much. I mean, such, love and blessings and empathy to your family. I can't even imagine, you know, uh, uh, we've all been through things on this, in this group, obviously. But it's an exceptional story of courage. And thank you for that. If anyone would like to ask Amy a question or share your experience, please put your name in chat. We have a lot of, I'm sure a lot of people have identified with parts of your story, but I have a couple of questions first, if that's okay.
Sure.
So the first question I have is, why the Eastern District of Virginia? I hate to, I'm sure we're going to ask a few legal questions here tonight, but why the Eastern District of Virginia? And was there an advantage to the government that they saw for being in that particular venue?
Yeah, I think from a threshold, I've done a lot of research, and I've never seen a private sector honest services fraud case in the Western District of Washington, which is, as you know, Seattle, where we lived and where my husband worked, and Washington law governed his employment terms. Eastern District of Virginia is home to Data Center Alley, more data centers than anywhere in the world. And the data centers at issue that my husband was accused of steering to the real estate developer were in the Eastern District of Virginia. Because I'm obsessive. But I have also done lots of research, and Amazon has referred I think over 70 federal criminal cases over the past 5 years, and they have done it in districts all over the country. And so I think they kind of spread it around too. Like they obviously could have gone to the Western District of Washington, but they chose not to. And they went to EDVA. I also think if you know EDVA, like they are, along with the Southern District of New York, like they're the toughest guys out there. So I think that was part of it too.
Thank you. I'm going to have a few more questions, but I want to see if anyone else out there has any questions. So if you would like to ask Amy a question or make a comment, or even talk about your own case and how this might, what you may have learned here, or how your case might have been handled differently. If there's anyone out there, please ask questions. Now would be the right time. Anybody? Bill, do you have a question?
Oh yeah, I do. Amy, thank you so much for being here tonight. So the first thought that came into my head as you began speaking was, how far up within Amazon do you think the decision to force this issue in a lawsuit went? And maybe based on the materials you were able to get through discovery, where did you see that coming from? In addition to the fact where you said because they wanted to get out of paying a big settlement to the real estate person that they broke the contract with.
Yeah, I think at the beginning, the decision to break the contract with the developer was not made super, super high up. I think it was made high up within Amazon Web Services. We know it was. It was made by a man named Chris Vondahar, who was like a level, if you know anything about Amazon, they're leveled. I think he was a level 10, which is pretty high up. He reported to the CEO of AWS, who was Andy Jassy, who is now the CEO of Amazon. But it wasn't made by like Andy Jassy or by Jeff Bezos. However, I do know that Amazon's general counsel has been aware of this intimately from at least the summer of 2020. And I know that because my main investor in my company, Amazon, or the Riveter, is a fund called Madrona Venture Group. And they were founded by Tom Alberg, who was Jeff Bezos' first investor. and they had invested millions of dollars into my company. And Tom Alberg had sat on Amazon's board for 20 years. And he, on my behalf, reached out to David Zapolsky in September of 2020, Amazon's general counsel, saying, we believe there's been some sort of mistake. We believe that, Carl's employment contract authorized this. And David's response was, we didn't know that Carl was Amy's husband, and we think the world of Amy, and we'll leave her out of this, but we're not going to talk to you about this. I also have been emailing Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Andy Jassy, David Zapolsky for the last 4 years with information, keeping them abreast of everything we found out so that they know, which is helpful. They've never written me back, shockingly, but they know.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Bill. Before we get to the next name, Amy, you mentioned honest services fraud. Everyone might not be aware of what that is. Do you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, it's typically, so there's honest services is a type of wire fraud. So where I think general wire fraud is 1343, honest services fraud is 1346. And it's typically used for politicians and public officials. But it can be used for private employees, and it's called private sector honest services fraud. And to commit private sector honest services fraud, you have to deprive your employer of your honest services, which doesn't have a definition, which is part of the problem with this whole statute, because like what could be considered a crime if you work at Netflix cannot be considered a crime if you work at Amazon, and that's not how criminal law is supposed to work. But you deprive your company of your honest services, which is sometimes called fiduciary duty, and do so by taking or paying kickbacks or bribes. And it's just, and this is like, I hope you can all appreciate this, but like a referral fee could be called a kickback or a commission or a rebate. And it's like, it's like there's no definition of anything. So it becomes, and kickbacks aren't per se illegal. And so you're kind of like, it just becomes, it's a very complicated statute. So, and the Supreme Court has come pretty close to overturning it for the second time. They overturned it in the aughts, and then Congress wrote a new version of it. And it's been narrowed by the Supreme Court. And eventually there'll be a case that goes up that they'll overturn it.
Wow. So some of our group members have been involved in honest services cases. So they know, but I don't think the general public or even most people in our group know what honest services fraud is. All right, let's go to Drew and then Jeremy.
Yeah, Amy, thank you. It's funny. Something just came back to me while you were telling your story, and that is that I remember while I was incarcerated reading your story. I think in Wired, maybe. I don't know if it was in Wired magazine, but and I remember like sitting around with the guys like talking about your story. So it's kind of funny to like watch it all come to life here. But I wanted to ask you about the process of sharing your story, like that decision to go on TikTok and to continue doing that. And I know you said you're starting to help other people share their stories too. That's something that I'm personally just starting to do now. I'm almost coming up on 2 years outside of prison, and our stories are fundamentally different because I definitely did wrong. And so I have some messaging challenges, but I wanted to hear like both the good and the bad, maybe your favorite parts or some things that you've struggled with while you start to tell those stories and you're helping other people do it. And if you have any pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think so many things. When I made the decision to speak publicly, I did it for a couple of reasons. This one, I always cry when I say it, but I try not to now. But like, we had 4 little girls, and I didn't know if Carl was going to end up being charged, prosecuted, convicted, which very well could have happened. And I wanted them to know that we fought. And they're little, and I knew that when they grew up, they'd read all about it on the internet. And so I was like, well, at least they'll have some sort of video diary of like how hard we fought and that we laid it all down and tried to do it. And then the second reason I did it is because I realized, and I think this is an incredibly horrifying practice of the DOJ, but like the DOJ writes the narrative, right? Like I could go on the internet and read a press release about any of you and the allegations against you. If you were proven innocent, the DOJ sure as shit wouldn't issue a press release that you've been proven innocent, right? But like, or like if you had pled to something far lesser, or you know how it is, right? And so the story was written, and it didn't. I stayed quiet for a long time because everyone tells you to be quiet. But then I at one point got a job because I needed to make more money to pay lawyers than I was making with my startup. And I got a job at a public tech company, and the compensation was $1 million a year. And I was fired on the 5th day because they read an article about my husband. And I realized at that point, like, it didn't even matter if I was quiet or not. And everyone was going to just read the narrative and assume what had happened, and it was going to impact me. And so I was going to just tell the true narrative. And so that's why I decided, the other reason I decided to do it. My favorite part of telling the story is the people that I've been connected through by telling the story, because I have met some of the most amazing people who are also just as impacted, who've had family members who are just as impacted. It's truly a community of incredibly brave and smart people who have an empathy that a lot of people in the world lack. And the hardest part has been, I guess, like a little bit of, you get bullying, but I also, like, at a certain point, like, I don't care, whatever. If some like anonymous account is going to bully me and they're not brave enough to say their name, that's fine. They can do it. Helps the algorithm, I guess. But any advice I would give if you want to tell your story is, like, Drew, it's your story is worth telling, even if you did wrong. Right. And I think it's incredibly important because millions of Americans are just as impacted. It is incredibly isolating. It's built to be isolating. It's built to make you feel small. And, like, if you did wrong and you paid your debt back to society, like, you have every right to, and you should tell that story because it will help people feel less alone, and I think it's really powerful. It amazed me. I had no idea how many people in this country were just as impacted or had loved ones who were, because we don't talk about it. Right. And if you do, like, we don't talk about it. And if you do plead or you are convicted and you serve your sentence and you get out, like, a lot of people just want to get on with it and don't want it to be the whole story of their life. But I think it's really brave and powerful to tell the story and share it with people because you will help people. The one other piece of advice I would give is that, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. One of the most interesting things I found in telling my story is I always told the whole story, but I learned what part of it resonated with people, what parts I need to make more simple, by just telling it over and over again in different ways. And, from that, like, and this is like the content side of me going back to the Riveter, like, from that, you can do so many things. You could learn about the book that you should write. You could learn about the newsletter you should start. You can learn about the podcast you could start, because you learn what's resonating with people and where you can help them learn.
Thank you, Drew. By the way, Amy, the nuts and bolts of this are fascinating to our group. I guarantee you, it's like we're all thinking and talking about these things all the time. So
Yeah.
I got to get our stories out there.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Next is Jeremy and then Dylan.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for sharing your story tonight. It's very inspiring. My question is similar to Drew's, but maybe a little bit more specific in terms of community and extended family. When the FBI or Department of Justice show up at your house, it's like a bomb going off. How did they react to that? Your community, your friends, your family? Did you feel isolated, or do you feel like it was? Can you just talk a little bit on that for us?
Oh my gosh. For all of you who've been through this, I'm sorry, because it is one of the hardest things. Our family was incredibly supportive. Never blinked, not for a minute. My father-in-law is a lawyer. My father is a lawyer. My sister is a lawyer. We had a lot of lawyers in our family. My mother, who is a retired public school teacher. I mean, I left out the part, like, when the FBI came for the first 3 weeks, my body just, like, couldn't process what was happening. I was still nursing my baby. My milk dried up. I started physically shaking. I couldn't stop. I lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. It was just, I mean, I now know that I froze. But, like, having never been through something like that, I was like, what is happening to me? And I would just go into the bathroom and lay on the floor. And my mother faced, and pandemics, like, my parents, no one could come, right? Like, no one could come be with us. So my mother one morning, who's the toughest person I know, she FaceTimes me and she was like, get up. And I just looked at her and I was like, I can't. She's like, yes, you can. And she's like, you need to get up and fight, like, right now. And that was like, that's to say, like, who my family is. Like, they were just like, get up and fight, like, just stop. There's no way out of it but through it. So get up. Anyway, our family was wildly supportive. We lived with them. Like, we knew we had to sell our house because our assets were seized. We lived with my sister in California for a month, all 6 of us. We lived with my husband's parents in Honolulu, which was not terrible, but we lived with them in Honolulu for 9 months. And then we lived with my parents in a townhouse in Columbus, Ohio for 3 months before renting the house I'm sitting in now. Most of my friends were great to me, to my face. And I think mostly My husband, it was far more complicated because, and I don't know if this is true of most men, but it's true of my husband, like most of his friends were work friends. And that was just gone in a blink, right? Like just, I mean, it was over. These people would not talk to him, would not associate with him. And also one of his best friends from preschool was also in data center real estate development because my husband had brought him into the business, and their friendship completely fell apart. People showed up for us that were completely unexpected and were like ride or dies forever. Other people weren't, you know. One of the hardest things for me is that, like, in the female founder community, which is something I'd been deeply a part of, I'd worked really hard to be a part of it and be a leader in it. That community just like ostracized me. Like they were like, "You're done, you're out." And I was like, "What the fuck?" Like what, like, you know, it's like, what, I'm not like, this doesn't make any sense, but it was just, and then it was even harder. Like when I was telling my story, I told you about me telling my story on TikTok, but I did do media as well because media started to reach out to me after I started telling my story on TikTok. But the media that reached out to me is conservative leading media. It was Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson. And I talked to them because I wanted to tell my story everywhere I could. That was my decision. And when I started going on Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson, because my company is very progressive, I had historically been very progressive my whole life. Like, I mean, people just came for me. And it was, and I had to just like, I just took a line with them that I was kind of, I'm doing anything I can for my family. And like, I will speak to anybody, and I would love to speak to everyone. I'm trying to talk to CNN. I'm trying to talk to the New York Times, but they won't talk to me. And I actually had the New York Times tell me they wouldn't tell my story because it supported all of the allegations Trump was making about the DOJ. And then I was just like, but anyway, I just made a decision that it was far more important for me to tell our story and try to make sure that my husband's truth was told than care what other people thought about it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next is Dylan and then Charlie.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. Really awesome story. I'm really sorry that you and your family have had to go through this. I know that obviously there's probably some positives that have come out of it, but it sounds horrifying. And I just, I, much like Drew, did something wrong, and I'm gonna have to live with that for the rest of my life and pay for it accordingly. I also had a drug addiction that I've overcome. But for me, during all the stress, a lot of my coping mechanisms and things like that were to take drugs or something of that nature. And obviously, now that I'm sober, I've learned new coping skills and ways to deal with and manage stress. But, I knew deep down that I did something wrong. For you, who, didn't do anything wrong and had all this stuff happen to you, how were you able to kind of cope and deal with stress? And not only, it wasn't just an acute event, it was thing after thing after thing. And I feel like when that stuff keeps happening to you, it's very easy to lose hope and like throw your hands up and just feel like the world is stacked against you. So I guess, like, what were some of the, tools you use to get through that mentally? Because that's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. And
Sure.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I felt hopeless a lot. But my coping mechanism was the work. I think that's just part of who I am. It was like I obsessed over like the legal part of it and fixing it. Right. And that's like whenever I started to spiral, I just did the work. That was completely my coping mechanism. It took me a long time to realize that's what it was. Turned out to be pretty helpful, but like nonetheless, that was absolutely my coping mechanism. But I did feel hopeless a lot. The thing that I think probably steadied me, if something did, was the fact that I had 4 very little kids that needed to be parented. And like for 18 months, we weren't near my parents. It was a pandemic, like nobody else could parent them. And, my husband should tell his own story, but he did have, he will readily say like he coped with it in a not healthy way a lot. And so like I was the primary parent and I was parenting. And so that just kind of kept me going because they needed a parent. And then I think, I've told this story not super publicly, but I will tell all of you. After the FBI raid, I woke up into a panic every morning. My rational brain knew the FBI wasn't coming back, but my body did not understand that. And I would wake up into fight or flight, scanning. Like, it was horrible. And a couple of people recommended that I try some newer PTSD therapy that, some veterans are trying. And I went and did that, and it really changed my life. But, I think trying emerging therapies can be really helpful. But anyway, it was, it's easy to feel hopeless because they want you to feel hopeless, right? So It's kind of like, but yeah. And then also, I would say about a year and a half ago, my husband and I decided, because we really lost our relationship in all of this because we had 4 little kids, we were working, we were fighting. And so we decided that we needed just to spend more time together and try to build our relationship. And so we started working out together. So we lift weights together like 4 times a week. It's what we do together now. It's been amazing for both of us. And that is an incredibly healthy and good way, I think, for us to cope.
It's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that you're doing much better. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Dylan. And almost everybody on this call has had their own version of the helicopter scene from Goodfellas, so we know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
Let's see. Next is Charlie, and then Greg.
Thanks, Jeff. Amy, thank you so much for sharing. Your story resonates with me personally. To give you a little context of why, a lawyer represented a client accused of honest services fraud involving a significant, large-scale, major city real estate project. I didn't know anything about their impropriety, and the FBI asked me to wear a wire. I refused, and I was accused of tax evasion. My client got off because of the Skillman decision, which changed the definition, but they still prosecuted me for tax evasion. I went to trial, I lost, and the history of 10, 12, 15 years ago. That's not the reason I'm asking. I'm just giving you a context. My question is about lawyers. I heard throughout your presentation that your husband surrounded himself by professionals besides you. I'm going to take you out of the message. Bona fide experts about structuring and understanding the nuance of relationships in the law. Amazon also had a plethora of highly skilled or questionably skilled lawyers who charges an insane amount of money. My question is, what about the inquiry regarding those professionals? Did the DOJ, did the judges, or anyone through the process ask about the advice or conduct of the lawyers? And did they, A, become the subject of any scrutiny in the judicial process, or B, in the disciplinary process?
Well, thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry you went through that. And I will say also that at one point the DOJ
Well, but I just, I got my law license back, so that's history for me. But I'm interested about the lawyers. I'm sorry it's not about your husband.
But like, are you interested in the lawyers like that my husband used, or the lawyers that
I heard a story about a lot of lawyers being involved in representing a very sophisticated transaction, and for some reason they seem to have just skid by here. And your husband was the scapegoat.
Well, my husband's business lawyer did become a target of the federal investigation, and Amazon did sue him. And I mean, he had to, like, the government had to move forward. They had to say he was also,
as I expected. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And he was in his 50s, and like wasn't accused of like making extra money or stealing anything. They're just like, you decided to start criming as a lawyer in your 50s for fun, apparently. And the federal judge in the racketeering, in the Amazon civil lawsuit, I said he left 2 state law claims in. For the lawyer, he's like, you're out of here. You were a lawyer. Like, they can't come after you, because he's like, there's nothing that shows you did anything outside of lawyering. And that was like when the DOJ told this lawyer, his name's Rod Atherton, that he was a target. Like, they never spoke to him, never talked to him, like just sent him a target letter. Like, they never once had a conversation with him. But as to any other lawyer, like, nobody ever asked. Like, nobody ever asked what was Amazon's review of these deals. Nobody ever asked. We do know that Amazon said, this is really comical, actually. When Amazon sued my husband in civil court, they sued him and they said he broke these X, Y, and Z provisions of his employment contract. And we were like, that's not his employment contract, because Amazon had a new employment contract and my husband had the original. So we go back to Amazon, and this is like, months after DOJ started their investigation, after they took our money. We go to Amazon and we're like, can you show us this employment contract you think Carl Nelson signed? My husband's name is Carlton Nelson. Everyone at Amazon has like their own essentially social security number for Amazon. And Gibson Dunn sends over this employment contract for a person named Carl Nelson, who'd signed the new version of the employment contract. It was DocuSign. The DocuSign like envelope was gone. I reach out to somebody who still works at Amazon, and I was like, can you go into People Finder and find this person? And they find this other Carl Nelson who was a truck driver in Illinois. But through that process, Amazon claimed that they'd never looked at my husband's employment contract until that moment. And it's interesting to me, like, that no lawyer was ever asked about that or nothing, anyway. But no, they didn't ask any of the other lawyers who'd done all of these sophisticated deal reviews.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlie. Great question. Next is Greg.
Yeah, hi, Amy. Thanks for sharing your story. That's fascinating. I could listen to you talk about it, I think, for hours. A couple of questions. I think they're relatively quick ones, so I'll ask more than one. But how much of the outcome do you think was influenced by the fact you had some legal background? And my point of the question is, a lot of us have gone through this without any, we didn't understand the law at all, and we relied completely on our lawyers for their advice. But how did you feel you were able to, do you feel you were able to influence the outcome because of your legal background?
It's a great question, Greg. And I think the way I think about it, it's like if you have a loved one with a very complex medical issue, if you have a doctor in your family, they're going to help you translate with the doctor that's treating your loved one. And I think that we saved a lot of money because I'm a lawyer, because I was able to translate to my husband a lot of more complicated legal issues. Not that my husband's brilliant, but like he had no legal experience, right?
Yeah.
So I was able to save us money by translating and taking that on. And I also think one of the things that me being a lawyer really helped us do is find the right lawyer for my husband who was willing to fight, because I'm sure, as many of you know, there aren't a lot of lawyers who actually go up against the DOJ and fight. And so I think that helped a lot as well. And then I think, I will say, like, we were able to get a lot more legal representation because I was a lawyer, because I was able to do things we couldn't have afforded. Like, I obsessively looked at like old Amazon law cases where I found statements they'd made that were directly contrary to what they were telling the DOJ about their employment contract or their code of conduct. And like those things, I think, were incredibly pivotal in getting the DOJ to end this and winning the civil case. But my husband had great lawyers, but like he had one lawyer or two lawyers, whereas like Amazon has 47 lawyers that have worked on this for them. It's crazy.
And just another question is, and maybe you said it at the very beginning and I just missed it, but how did Amazon feel like they were harmed through this? And I'm not saying it wouldn't be wrong for somebody to accept, a bribe, if that's what they were calling it. But I guess I wasn't clear on how did they feel like they were financially impacted?
Oh, it's a great question, Greg. Amazon told the DOJ that they were like defrauded out of tens of millions of dollars, that they paid these inflated prices for this real estate, which,
Okay.
as the judge said in the civil case, the judge was so pissed at Amazon for this, because he was like, all of the evidence shows that you underpaid for this land. Like, you've just been lying. And the craziest part, this is like another crazy turn in all of this, but Amazon made this allegation, and like, how would my husband disprove them, right? Like, and some of this was related to Amazon data center leases. And the leases they were complaining about were the cheapest leases Amazon had ever gotten in the whole world for data centers. But like Amazon went and said X, Y, and Z to the DOJ. And the thing is, when my husband was fired from Amazon for yelling at a vendor, whatever. He had, when he was walked out of Amazon, he'd left on his desk a hard drive that had all of his Amazon documents backed up on it, because Amazon had told him to back up the documents. He left it on his desk like a good employee, because he was fired and he was leaving Amazon. 3 days later, a crate shows up at our house with all the contents of his desk, including the hard drive. My husband just like put it in our garage and we didn't think about it. But then after the DOJ came and they were saying you overpaid, you like defrauded Amazon by forcing them to overpay for all this land. My husband's like, the hell I did. And he's like, look, I've got all the documents to back it up. And his lawyers told the DOJ that like they had all these very specific numbers when they went and gave that presentation in May of 2020, at which point the DOJ then got a search warrant and took my husband's laptop. But they left the hard drive sitting on the desk. Can't make it up. But yeah. So anyway, they said they were defrauded, but they of money. It said they overpaid, but they underpaid.
Just one final comment. I really appreciate you sharing your political perspective on this, because I think it's real easy for us to, doesn't matter what side of the aisle we fall on, but we start to think the side we support,
Yeah.
would never do something like this, and we view the other side as, oh yeah, I can absolutely see this happening. I think it's important for us to understand both sides of the aisle can abuse their power just as well as the other side, and we should never lose sight of that. That if we think one political party can be more abusive than the other, I think we're fooling ourselves.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Greg. Next is Bill, then Keith.
Thanks again, Amy. I have to say your experience when you talked about worrying about who would be at the door. I used to worry about who would come into the driveway. I lived out in the country and I would have a panic attack when a car would just come to turn around in the driveway, because I thought, oh my God, they're coming back. And so when you said that, I'm just like, oh yeah, I know exactly. Well, that definitely resonated with me. What's really important to me too, in addition to hearing you speak, are how is Carl and how are your children?
Thank you so much for asking that. And I'm sorry about the driveway thing. I empathize with you immensely. Carl is pretty good. I think all things considering. He's doing data center development work again. But he is, he's angry. He's angry. He is hurt. He is just, it's just been a struggle, but he really came back from an abyss. I'm really proud of him because I think he could have fallen into an abyss, and he made a decision about a year and a half ago not to. And I'm endlessly proud of him for that. He's incredibly strong and he's got a lot of integrity. So, and he wants to pursue justice on this front. And so that's what we're trying to do. My daughters are they're now 10, 8, 7, and 5. And it's a question I'm constantly asking myself is, how has this impacted them? Because you try to shield your kids from stress, but it's impossible. And they know. And we answer questions very openly about it. And they have lots of feelings about Jeff Bezos. That's who they pinned this on, Jeff. They call him Jeff Bezos. He's the villain of their childhood. But they definitely, it's interesting. The child that it has impacted the most is my youngest child, my baby. And I think it could be because she didn't have years of stability before this happened. But they'll be okay. Kids are really resilient, but it's something that they will process, I think, forever.
Thank you.
I agree. What it sounds like to me, though, what I think is really good is that these kind of episodes, these aren't one conversation and it's over. These are multiple conversations over years of time.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad to hear that it's something that you're really open about. Because the older they get, they're going to have different questions, and I think they'll value in time, or I hope they will value in time that you were open.
Yeah.
And that they'll trust when you tell them, you're telling them the truth. And that's so important.
Thank you.
Yeah. And tell your husband he's welcome here on Mondays too.
I'm sure he would love to.
Okay. Thank you again, Amy.
Love to have him.
Amy, Carl is welcome here on Monday nights and you are not. All right, Keith, you're up.
Amy, I'm listening to your story and the feeling of anger, that comes across that we've all been through, that feeling of being violated, no matter what we did, there is a method to what the DOJ does to intimidate the public. Okay? They have no reason to come to your home 6 o'clock in the morning, bang on your door with 8 FBI agents, which came to my home, okay, and basically embarrass you in front of your neighbors, take you out in handcuffs, the whole thing. And my question as we end this wonderful evening that you've really shared with us is, how are you dealing with the anger, and what do you want to do? What do you think we as an organization, as a community, can do to really have an impact on what's going on within our DOJ? Because it doesn't matter about your political persuasion. They don't care when they come to destroy you. They don't ask if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. They just come and get you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I have so much anger. Like, I can talk about this without like being completely angry, but I have lots of anger. I think that we need a concentrated effort from justice impacted families to demand change. And it can be terrifying because the DOJ is terrifying. The one thing I will say about the DOJ that's coming is, if there was ever a DOJ that was open to reform, it would be this one. And I hope that no matter anyone's political persuasion, that people come together and use this opportunity to talk about the things within DOJ that can and should change. If you think back to after Watergate, the church committee came together that was led by a bipartisan group of senators that dove into the misdeeds of the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA. It was a shocking committee report that came out of it that changed these agencies. And it's been a generation since then, and we have forgotten. And I always say to my Democratic friends, I'm like, oh my gosh, like the FBI 2016, like James Comey, what he did with Hillary's emails right before the election could have changed the outcome of Hillary's election, right? This isn't like, it's just an agency with a lot of power that will do what it wants to do, which I think is hold on to power. And there's so many things in the DOJ reforms, large and small, that could really change things. Like I mentioned, press releases, like that has to stop. That is so ridiculous, right? Because, journalists just repeat the press releases and it tells the story about you on the internet. Like, I mean, it would be like, imagine if your company was like sent out a press release, like, we sent out an RFP. Like, you know what I mean? It's like announcing an indictment is just that. Like, we live in a country founded on the belief that you are innocent until proven guilty. So sending out a press release that you have charged someone with a crime is absolutely ridiculous. But I think we need to lobby and have lots of reform. And, I talked to the Heritage Foundation. I talked to all sorts of I talked to the Heritage Foundation and I talked to the ACLU, right? Like, I'm just trying to talk to everybody, but I think that's what we need to do. And I think for those who did not want Trump to win, I think a silver lining is that this administration will have conversations about reforming the DOJ.
Thank you, Keith. Keith, are you done? Is that your last question?
Yeah, I'm just in awe of your resilience and your willingness to share your story, because we as a community need people like you, okay, who are willing to stand up and fight. So, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I'm sure everyone feels the same way. We're thankful that you're here and hope that this won't be a one and done, and that you can participate with us in some meaningful way.
I would love to.
Thank you, Keith. Our last question is going to be by Karen, and then I'll wrap it up with you, Amy. Great, Karen.
Thank you. So I am the wife of my husband's been charged with an SEC violation. And my question for you, Amy, is that I'm a little nervous, but the reason I'm asking you is because everybody that I've talked to in this arena says you have to divorce your husband. Oh my gosh. You have to divorce your husband because otherwise you're going to lose everything. So you might as well take what you can out of this, which is devastating. The whole thing is devastating, right? So he was charged and investigated in May of 2023. We've been living with it for a while. I, like you, have dug in, like just everything I can find out about this. It's an SEC, kind of a newer charge that I'd never heard of. And I was actually in the investment business myself. So it was new to me. Nonetheless, I dug in and tried to find everything out I could. I found a group of women that are kind of underground and are all innocent wives and have gone through the hell that you've gone through, but knew nothing about what their spouse is supposedly being accused of. All of those women, for the most part, any attorney I've talked to, was like, you gotta split the marital assets, or you're gonna end up with nothing, which everything I've been told is happening. I mean, everything they've said is they've lived this. So last thing I really want to do, we've been married for 35 years, 4 kids, 8 grandkids. I'm kind of old to start over. It's like, wow. And so there's very few women, that's why I'm really impressed by you, that stuck by your husband, and not only stuck by him, but like fought the fight for him and with him. What advice would you give to me? Because it's like, that's all I'm getting is you have to divorce your husband.
I'm so sorry that you're going through this, and I'm sorry for your husband deeply. I feel for you. And I cry all the time. So I don't think you have to divorce your husband. I will say, like, from a financial perspective, my husband and I were like, well, we're going to spend every dollar we have fighting this. So fuck it. Like, we're going to have nothing left at the end anyway. I mean, so, that was kind of like, we'll just make more money. I say that flippantly. Obviously, it's been terrifying at so many points, but we did make that decision. Like, we're just going to spend everything on fighting. And because we're like, well, at the end of the day, our parents will let us live with them, and all of our children can come live there too. But, I also knew, at the begining, before I had to sell our house, I knew they couldn't take our house, right? Because there's a homestead exemption, like they wouldn't be able to take our house. So we would have at least that. But I also, I know there are not a lot of couples that stay together through this.
No.
But if you don't want to get divorced, I wouldn't.
Some days I do. He's on this call too. I mean, of course, it's a nightmare. And it's like, I didn't sign up for this, but I'm also like, take my vows, like, okay, but I don't really, but I still love you, but you've kind of messed up, and I don't know really, the outcome, but it's like, I can't, how do you start over? I'm not in my 40s or 50s, so it's kind of not an easy place to be. And if they take everything, and nobody's going to empathize with wives of, like, we had a good life, and so it looks like you should have known or something. You knew too.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that, like, and of course, and I will also say, like, to be very candid and honest, like, my marriage was like in shambles for half of this, of course, right? And like, there's still so much repair and pieces you're picking up, and it definitely could have ended in divorce. Like, even while I was fighting for him, like, there were times I'm like, even I will fight for this man, but I cannot stay married to him for X, Y, and Z reasons. But I think all I can say is, like, I don't think that you have to get divorced. I understand people saying that, but I don't think that has to be the outcome. I think another one of my friends whose husband did go to prison and they stayed married. She said that couples therapy helped them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say my husband and I tried that, and it did not work so well for us. But for some people it really works. So it's just something to try. But I also, like, one thing that really helped my husband and I think, was finding something to do together that was, like, not dealing with this. And that was working out. It was just like a way to connect. It was something that helped. But I think the hard truth of it is that, like, when this happens, innocent or guilty, when you're a target, when you are somehow taken into the justice system, you are going to start over. You're going to have to start over from whatever life you had. Your life is not going to be the same. And so, like, you're starting over. It's just a matter of, like, do you want to start over within the framework that you have, or a different one?
Yeah.
It's not fair. It's not fair. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Well, I was just interested in your input, because most of the women, like I said, I've talked to, they're like, they got the same advice, and they're all done.
Yeah. Also, think of it this way too. Like, we had, I did know everything my husband did, and I had told him it was okay. So I had immense amounts of guilt about that, right? Like, oh my God, I thought it was okay. I went to top 5 law school. And then like second to that, like we had 4 little children.
Yeah.
And I was like, I am not raising these little children all by myself. You
No.
are raising them with me. We have all
Yeah.
these little kids. So,
Yeah.
you know, different life stage too.
Yeah. And I would say the only thing I can say thank the Lord for is that my kids are raised. You know, I don't have to drive them to school or, you know, worry about college or any of that kind of stuff. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate your input.
So Karen, I am going to give you a little bit of feedback on that.
Okay.
Just to the extent that we've been doing this a long time, and we know pretty much every group that's out there, whether it's for the people who are directly justice impacted, their families, their spouses, and I would advise everyone to watch out for confirmation bias and just make sure that you understand who you're speaking to and what the size of that sample is. They you know, if you go to a surgeon, you're going to get cut. If you go to a group that advocates getting divorced, that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, good point.
All right. So at any rate, thank you, Karen. Thank you for that question. And thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. This will be posted on YouTube and on our website soon. Our website, again, prisonist.org. That's prisonist-like-feminist.org. You can reach Amy on TikTok or on several other platforms at Amy_K_Nelson. Did I get that right?
Yeah,
Sounds
that's
right. It's the same on all of them. Amy, you were a tremendous guest and a tremendous story. And, you know, we feel for your family. And of course, any help we can give you, please let us know. Please ask your husband if you'd like to get in touch with us at info@prisons.org, and we'll get him all the information. So blessings to everyone. Thank you for being here tonight, and we'll see you all next time. Again, thank you, Amy Nelson.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.